Lydia carefully prepared the wine. She selected the finest crystal glass, polishing it until it sparkled under the light. With steady hands, she opened the bottle and poured the perfect measure of wine, the deep ruby liquid gleaming as it flowed. As the scheduled time approached, Lydia took a moment to check her reflection in a nearby mirror. She smoothed down her uniform, tucked away any stray gray hairs, and took a deep breath. The face staring back at her was etched with years of hard work and quiet endurance. For a brief second, she felt a flicker of pride in her professionalism and her ability to persevere despite everything. But as she lifted the silver tray holding the wine, that small moment of confidence evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of dread. Each step she took down the plush hotel corridor toward Mr. Hawthorne's suite felt heavier than the last. She paused outside the grand double doors, took one more steadying breath, and raised her hand to knock. The sound echoed through the quiet hallway. "Enter," came a commanding voice from inside. Lydia turned the handle, pushed the door open, and stepped into the lavish suite. Little did she know, this encounter would challenge her strength in ways she could never have anticipated. The opulence of the room momentarily took her breath away. Plush carpets silenced her footsteps, and the warm glow of crystal chandeliers illuminated the space in a soft, golden light. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a stunning view of the city skyline, one that Lydia had only ever seen from the streets below. Her gaze quickly found Mr. Hawthorne, lounging casually in a high-backed leather chair, his eyes lazily scanning the room as if assessing every detail. "Your wine, sir," Lydia said quietly, her voice steady despite the anxiety swirling inside her. Hawthorne's eyes flicked toward her, sweeping over her in a way that felt more like an appraisal than acknowledgement. His lip curled slightly in distaste, and Lydia's stomach tightened. "Set it down here," he said dismissively, gesturing toward a side table. Lydia moved carefully across the room, hyper-aware of his gaze following her every step. As she placed the tray down, she noticed how his eyes lingered on her hands that bore the marks of decades of hard work, the calluses and the swollen joints that told a story of years spent scrubbing, polishing, and lifting. "Tell me," Hawthorne began, his tone deceptively casual, "how long have you worked here?" "Just a few weeks, sir," Lydia replied, straightening but keeping her eyes respectfully lowered. Hawthorne chuckled, though there was no warmth in the sound. "And let me guess, you thought this job would be your ticket to an easy retirement? A chance to rub elbows with people better than you?" Lydia felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, but she kept her face neutral. "No, sir," she said softly. "I'm just here to do my job." "Your job?" Hawthorne repeated, as if savoring the words. "And what exactly do you think your job is in a place like this?" He flicked the ash from his cigar, letting it fall onto the immaculate carpet below. "Your job," he continued, his voice hardening, "is to be invisible, to clean up our messes without being seen or heard, to remember your place." He gestured lazily toward the ashes scattered across the floor. "Well, isn't that your job? Clean it up." Lydia hesitated, her pride warring with the reality of her situation. Then, slowly, she knelt down and reached into her apron for a cloth. "No, no," Hawthorne said, his voice laced with mockery. "Use your hands. Use your hands. I want to see how well you serve," Hawthorne commanded. Lydia swallowed her pride, kneeling down to scoop the warm ashes into her palm. The embers stung her skin as she worked, and Hawthorne continued to puff on his cigar, occasionally flicking more ash onto the carpet beside her. "You know," he mused, blowing a cloud of smoke that made Lydia's eyes water, I've always been fascinated by people like you, scraping by, taking jobs meant for those half your age. Don't you ever just want to give up?" Each word was like a lash against her spirit, but Lydia remained silent, focusing on her task. She had survived worse in her life. She could survive this. As she finished cleaning the last of the ashes, Hawthorne's voice sliced through the silence again. "While you're down there, my shoes could use a shine." Lydia looked up, disbelief flashing across her face. Hawthorne leaned forward, extending his polished leather shoes toward her. "Well," he said, impatience creeping into his tone, "I don't have all day." With trembling hands, Lydia reached for his shoes. She had no cloth, no polish, only her bare hands and the fabric of her uniform. She began rubbing the leather, trying to bring out a shine. Hawthorne watched her every move, his gaze filled with smug satisfaction. "That's right," he murmured, his voice dripping with condescension. "Know your place. This is where you belong, isn't it? Serving those who are better than you." Lydia's hands moved mechanically, her mind retreating to a quiet place deep inside. She focused on her breathing, on the repetitive motion of her hands, anything to block out Hawthorne's cruel words. "I suppose I should commend you for your persistence," Hawthorne continued, his voice a mix of amusement and disdain. "It must take a special kind of determination to keep going at your age, doing work meant for younger, stronger hands." He paused, taking a long drag of his cigar before exhaling slowly, the smoke curling around Lydia's head. "Or maybe it's just a lack of imagination, an inability to see yourself as anything more than a servant. Tell me, did you ever dream of something better? Or did you always know this was your fate?" Lydia remained silent, her jaw clenched, fighting back the urge to respond. She had once dreamed, of course, dreamed of a life where her hard work would be acknowledged, where she could stand tall with pride. But those dreams had long been buried. She had learned the hard way that dreams were a luxury she couldn't afford. As she finished polishing his shoes with nothing but the fabric of her uniform, Hawthorne leaned back in his chair, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "That will do," he said, dismissing her with a flick of his hand, as if shooing away an insignificant fly. "You can go now. Oh, and next time, try to be less visible. Your presence is distracting." Lydia stood slowly, her knees aching from kneeling on the hard floor. She smoothed down her uniform, trying to regain some sense of dignity. "Is there anything else you need, sir?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Hawthorne's eyes narrowed, a cruel glint in them. "Need? From you? Think not," Hawthorne said dismissively. "Just remember your place and we'll get along just fine. Now, get out of my sight." With a small nod, Lydia turned and walked toward the door, her steps slow and careful. She could feel Hawthorne's eyes on her back, the smug satisfaction in his silence almost palpable. It wasn't until the door closed behind her that she let her shoulders slump, the weight of the encounter pressing down on her like a physical burden. For a long moment, she stood there in the hallway, leaning against the door, trying to pull herself together. The plush carpet, the ornate wallpaper, and the soft lighting all seemed to mock her, a gilded cage that trapped her in a world where she would never truly belong. With a deep, shaky breath, Lydia straightened her back and smoothed her uniform again. She had endured, she had survived, and she would continue to do so no matter the indignities she faced. But as she walked away from Hawthorne's suite, a small part of her, a part she thought had long been silenced, cried out in protest against the injustice of it all. The corridors of the Silver Crest Hotel seemed endless as Lydia walked through them, her feet moving on autopilot. The opulence that had once impressed her now felt suffocating, each polished surface and plush carpet a reminder of the humiliation she had just endured. She passed other staff members, their curious glances sliding off her unnoticed. In that moment, Lydia felt more invisible than ever. Almost without realizing it, she found herself outside the janitor's closet. It was a small, utilitarian space tucked away in a forgotten corner of the hotel, far from the eyes of guests. Among the mops, brooms, and cleaning supplies, it was the closest thing Lydia had to a sanctuary in this gilded prison. She slipped inside, closing the door softly behind her. The harsh, fluorescent light flickered on, casting sharp shadows across the cluttered space. For a moment, Lydia just stood there, her back against the door, her eyes closed as she tried to steady her breathing. But as the adrenaline from the encounter began to fade, the full weight of what had happened hit her with crushing force. The cruel words, the deliberate humiliation, the casual dismissal of her humanity, it all came rushing back, overwhelming her. Lydia's legs gave out, and she slid down the door until she was sitting on the cold tile floor. Her hands, still faintly smelling of cigar ash and leather, began to tremble. And then, for the first time in years, Lydia Harris began to cry. At first, it was just a few quiet tears slipping down her weathered cheeks. But soon, the sobs came, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. Years of pent-up frustration, anger, and sorrow poured out of her like a dam finally breaking. As she cried, fragmented memories flashed through her mind. Her first job as a teenager, scrubbing floors in a diner, the pride she had felt earning her own money and helping her family. The years of hard work that followed, one job blending into the next in an endless cycle of service. The dreams she had quietly nurtured of respect, dignity, and a life where she could walk with her head held high, all crushed under the weight of reality.